Wait.
Okay.
Recording.
Okay. So how many of you guys know the show Orange is the New Black? You guys like it? I know I love that show, and particularly I love the character of Sophia, played by Laverne Cox. So on June 9th, 2014, Laverne Cox graced the cover of Time magazine for their cover story titled The Transgender Tipping Point. She's a transgender woman and actress in the television show Orange is the New Black. She's an avid activist for the LGBT community, which means the lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay community. In the article, she discusses her life growing up and being transgender, and she discusses the experiences she has being a transgender woman, especially one that's in the media like she is. In the article, they talked about other people who were transgender as well and how they have brought about the transgender movement. So in Time magazine, she's quoted as saying, "We are now in a place where more and more people who are trans want to come forward and say, this is who I am. And more trans people are willing to tell their stories. More of us are living visibly and pursuing our dreams visibly." Laverne Cox's appearance on the cover was great. However, it did spark a lot of debate among critics and readers alike. Because of this debate, that brought about transgender issues to the forefront of social justice discussion in society. As a result of being transgender, people like Laverne Cox often are faced with severe persecution, being denied basic human rights, and they often encounter social rejection as a result of ignorance among society. So in order to ensure justice for transgender people, the key is educating people on trans issues and making sure they understand the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis. Now, oftentimes, transgender people face severe persecution in society. The discrimination that transgender people face is often more severe than those who are not transgender, even if they were gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Now, in the research that I did, I found this interesting statistic, which is a nationwide survey of bias-motivated violence against LGBT people from 1985 to 1998 found that incidents targeting transgender people accounted for 20% of all murders and about 40% of all police-initiated violence. Now think about those numbers for a second. That's crazy. That's basically saying that they are a target. Because people don't understand, it often results in them facing violence more than any other discrimination, which is a very scary thought. Oftentimes, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people still associate their gender with the genitalia they were born with. However, transgender people don't. So they were born one way and they decide to be shown in a different way. So they may have been born male and they decide that they want to be seen as male or female. And oftentimes they will get recorrective surgery, and sometimes they don't. That's their personal choice. So oftentimes with transgender issues, this leads to cisgender people, who are people who assign the gender at birth and they stick with that gender. These people often don't know how to handle those who are transgender. They have to challenge their stigmas that they have on transgender people, and this can often lead to something called cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is the idea that if you have one thought on something, and then something comes along and changes that thought, then you experience like a stirring inside. You experience an uncomfortability, and that's what happens when people encounter trans people. So from there, cognitive dissonance oftentimes results in prejudice, and then from prejudice, it often leads to discrimination, and oftentimes, like the statistic shows, violence. So not only are transgender people discriminated against, but they're also denied basic human rights that we all take for granted as cisgender people. Transgender people are often denied basic human rights due to their gender. Transgender people sometimes face difficulties in things such as getting a job, housing, healthcare. These are all things that we come to know that we're guaranteed this under the Constitution, but for trans people, it's not the same. Oftentimes job discrimination takes place, and oftentimes they struggle to even get a job because people don't accept those who are trans. And we're still working on laws that accept trans people in all institutions of our society. Now, trans people also face a bunch of legal issues that people who are not trans often don't face. So even lesbian people and bisexual people, as well as gays, do not face these issues. And these involve things like identity documents. So on your identity documents, such as licenses, they'll say that you're a certain gender, but you identify as something different. So that can result in issues with police and different functions of our society that cause issues further on. Also, sex-segregated public restrooms and other facilities are very embarrassing for those who are trans, because sometimes people won't let them go use like a restroom for the gender that they identify as, and instead they're forced to do something they're uncomfortable with and use a restroom that society tells them to, not how they self-identify. Oftentimes also dress codes are an issue. So they'll be told to wear a certain thing because that's the dress code, but that may not be how they identify. So between hate, violence, discrimination, and a denial of their human rights, transgender people have a lot standing in their way to equality. In addition, they face an abundance of social rejection due to a lack of empathy and understanding from members of society. Trans people face an abundance of social rejection due to the cognitive dissonance that I discussed earlier. So oftentimes, since people are uncomfortable with trans people in certain social situations, and they don't know how to process those who are trans, they get confused and they're afraid to ask. But one thing I came about in my research was that, and people who I've encountered who are trans, they tell me that they like to be asked. So if you ask what pronouns they prefer or how they like to identify, that makes them comfortable and you comfortable as well. And it shows that you respect them as a person and not as a gender or an identity. You respect their gender identity and them as a whole. However, being trans is slowly becoming more accepted in our society, which is really great. Like the Laverne Cox article helped a lot. However, it's still a major issue, and we're still working slowly but surely to ensure that people are getting the rights that they deserve. Ignorance to transgender issues fuels the fire against equality for transgender people, and in order to solve this, education is the solution. Oftentimes in my research, I would come about the religious arguments of people, and because when people face ignorance and they don't know how to encounter trans people, they take a religious front, and this can make trans people very uncomfortable, and it's not very productive in the trans rights movement. Transgender issues need to be brought to the attention of the general population. And in my research, I found that the best solution is early education. So teaching people and young students about transgender issues early on will show them that this is an acceptable part of society and show them that they deserve to be treated no differently than anybody else in our society, and that they're no different. They choose to identify as a woman just like an actual woman born a woman would choose to identify as a woman as well. So overall, our society has taken great strides in the fight for equality. Activists like Laverne Cox are aiding transgender awareness, and we are prompting the discussion necessary to move towards lessening the stigmas of transgender people. As a result of being transgender, people like Laverne Cox face severe persecution and are often denied basic human rights, as well as social rejection that they face. But in order to ensure justice for transgender people, education is the key. So thank you very much, guys, for listening.